We all want to make a positive impact on the world, but what do we have to experience to get there? This is Stripped Bare FM, where our shared stories of strategy, raw talk, and real people uplift and inspire you. Now, welcome the host of Stripped Bare FM, Catherine Contos.
Hello everyone. When suffering from child PTSD brings you to a breaking halt as an adult and suicide becomes a viable option, what needs to happen to turn your life around and eventually become an influencer? Today on Strip Bare FM, I have the pleasure of talking to Petrona Joseph. She has been the brand ambassador for fashion brands such as Harry Rosen and the first Black woman to represent the prestigious Bentley Motors. She was the VP of Marketing for the Montreal Caribbean Fashion Week and has been the honorary delegate for the film festival Views of the World. She is also a TV personality, a blogger, and influencer, and based in Montreal, Canada. I would like to take a moment to ask my listeners to subscribe to CatherineContos.com to get the latest details on my podcasts, retreats, blogs, and more. Now back to our guest. Welcome, Petrona. Are you ready for some raw talk?
I sure am. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Petrona, please bring me back to when you were a child. Tell me a little bit about your life and lead us to the moment where you experienced the trauma that changed your life.
It is always difficult to go back into the past because, even with therapy, it's that box that you like to shelve away. So you may hear me break down. If I do, please, I apologize. But my childhood was very choppy, very dysfunctional, very messed up. So my mother passed away when I was 3.
Sorry.
That's okay. When she passed away when I was 3, my dad left to go to New York. So we were still in Trinidad at the time. And we were actually staying with my father's mistress,
Oh, wow. Okay.
who didn't quite like us. And they're married today. They got married after all of that, anyways, but that's a whole other story. And then, so we were in Trinidad, then we were sleeping on floors, and then we were in Grenada sleeping on floors and with like strangers most of the times who didn't necessarily really like us because we weren't related to them. And, it's quote unquote taking care of another man's child. And then we got shipped to New York. Now, getting to New York, we had another family. There's a whole other family and sisters we have never met. So you could already imagine the separation of home to home to home. So by the time I was 5, I think I had already lived in maybe 6 different places, right?
Right.
So there's already that instability, and there's where the trauma set in, right? Because childhood trauma and childhood PTSD, it starts when you're very young and you're not aware of it. So the trauma of coming home and being told, oh no, you're not living here today. You're living somewhere else. And by the way, here's your new stepmother, That's pretty much how it was all my life until I became an adult. Now, New York, we had some fond memories, but it's always funny when I have a discussion with my sister, my eldest sister, who currently lives in New York. I remember one day telling her, hey, couldn't you cook anything else but macaroni and cheese? And it's a joke now, but it wasn't back then. But I was telling her, I said, hey, well, you gave us macaroni pie, and it's the 99 cents macaroni. And she looks at me as an adult and she goes, that's all we could have afforded. Then it hit me, oh my gosh, we were poor. And then it all made sense. All the struggles, all the unhappy times, all the violence. We saw a lot of violence. It's unfortunate to say, but my father used to beat my stepmother in New York. And having witnessed that and then being torn from that home by child services, right? More trauma.
Wow.
Then, yeah. Then one day we get home, we were homeless for 2 weeks in New York. But that made me, I think, as a human. I'll get to that a little bit later. But just the fact of we were living with, I think, my father's 7th girlfriend at the time. Her name was Gail. We got home. She changed the locks. New York women do not play, okay? When they're done with you, they're done with you. So Gail was like, pack your stuff, get your kids, get out of here. And I remember sitting in the car with my dad in New York. And he was calling people. And we ended up living in a basement of one of his friends for 2 weeks. Within that 2 week time frame, all I knew was that we were in Canada. So timeline, I'm about 12 years old. In Canada, class I could, we needed to learn the language. We needed to learn French, and we're poor again because my dad, he doesn't speak French, and I have a new mother, the same stepmother that I had when I was about 3. So she's back in my life, never really liked her, very abusive woman who thought I was in love with my own father. And so there was that always that innuendo, oh, you love your dad, you're in love with him. So growing up as a kid, that's quite dysfunctional for your personality formation, right? Now, as I get older, I'm being rebellious. I'm rebelling against everything I know. So if you tell me come back home at 4, I'm going to come home at 8. And that landed me in youth detention centers and other foster homes. So it was like just a lot of chaos. And my saving grace was one day when the judge says, okay, so we put her in group homes, we put her in foster care placement. What are we going to do with this kid? So my dad was like, okay, well, let's send her to like a reform army school. So that was my saving grace. I wasn't a reform army school, but it was a boarding school. It was a religious boarding school in Trinidad. So there I had an amazing nanny who made me understand, hey, you're a person. You know, I think I found out, like, I realized at 16, I'm a person, I'm okay. I'm smart. I have a head,
Yeah.
I don't need to rebel anymore. I don't need to fight the system. I could relax.
At the age of 3, you lose your mom, and that's where basically your life just changed, right? For the
Yes.
next so many years through
Until
teenagehood and
today.
everything.
Until today.
Yeah, of course, like that's a trauma that stays with you.
Mhm.
But the rebellion was coming out because you just had no stability anymore. And you're like, well, this isn't working out for me. I'm going to do what I want to do anyway, right?
Yeah. I ran away from home. I didn't want to be home anymore.
Right.
Didn't want to be around, the people that I called family.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Well, I have 7.
You were living with all 7 at the time, or were you split up?
We were split up. So at various stages in my life, we were 4, 5. And then when we came to Canada, we left 3 behind in New York. And then we were 2 here. And then another one came. Oh, blended families. That's what happens. And Catherine, not to go back to the 400 years of slavery, but a lot of Black families have this kind of dysfunction because of slavery, right? The up and down, one father who has multiple women who have children. It's very prevalent in Trinidad. So, and it's very characteristic of how the slave masters would have one man have multiple different children or multiple different families come together to create more children. So, and that's just something I just realized. I said, wow, and that's also trauma from slavery. All right, this just a side note.
It's just so I could understand a little better. Okay, because you're saying that from back then, from the slavery, the slave master used to have different women. And are you telling me it was the slaves that he was using? Or was this just something that the slaves were watching and learned from?
So the slave master would have a slave male have multiple different women. So there was never any commitment to one woman. And the reason why they did that is because if a man stays with one woman, then it's not productive for the slave masters. The slave masters needed the Black male, to reproduce multiple times.
I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yes. So, but yeah, as you were asking me a question about my family.
So how old were you in reference to your other siblings? Were you like a middle child, an older, a younger?
So I was at intervals the last, and then we have a stepsister after me, who's not related to my father, but then my father had a last child. So she's 10 years younger than me.
Okay, so now your saving grace was at this boarding school, right? Or boarding armies. What did you call it again?
Yeah, it's a boarding
A
school.
boarding school. Okay, so your saving grace at this was at this boarding school because there was some woman that actually woke you up from, what your experiences were and made you realize that you're an actual human being with emotions and intelligence and a future. So what was it that she did that shook you to make you understand all that?
She never gave up on me. People were giving up on me all my life. So, my dad, it was conditional. Everything was okay. If you do this, I will give you that and you will be a good girl. But with this woman, I I used to literally leave campus, go party, come back, and she'd know. And she'd say, "Well, what did you do on Saturday night?" And I would be like, "Oh, I was up in my dorm room." And she'd go through the call log and she'd be like, "No, Petrona." And then that really touched me. So every bad thing or every because you're a kid, right? Every teenage or immature thing I did, she just said, "Okay, this is going to be your punishment, and this is what you're going to do, but I still love you." She showed me love, and that changed me. I graduated, I think, the third of the like the whole group, and that was big because in Canada I was failing every class, right? I was in the newspaper in Trinidad, featured. I got awards, and then I wanted to go to law school there, but then my dad says, "You know what, it's time for you to come back to family." Would have been reformed because I was reformed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the same things happen again when I came back.
Right.
Yeah, I was 19 at the time. It was even worse.
Character doesn't change, when it comes to stuff like that. And it's incredible. I see it all the time. And when somebody finally has somebody that believes in them, it makes all the difference in the world. It could be a teacher, it could be a step parent, or whatever it is. But when there's that one person that believes in you and doesn't give up on you, it really saves that teenager or that child from more
Hmm.
detriment. And I'm glad you found that.
I'm lucky I found that.
Yeah. So you wanted to go to law school, you went back home and things hadn't changed. If anything, they were worse. So what was your next step?
The next step was calamity and disaster that led me into living by myself. So my dad was paying for an apartment for me in the West Island. And I had a sense of resilience because I wanted to be successful. I did focus. I was reformed. I really was, right? It was the people around me and my family that used me all the time as a scapegoat to ignore their problems that have come back to haunt them 30 years later. Like, we're in court for a lot of these problems even today. So, and none of my doing, by the way. But I always seem to like that woman who I met in Trinidad in the boarding school. She prayed for me a lot. So I think I had a sense of spirituality. I had a sense of like, I'm going to make it. I'm going to be the best that I could be. And that continued all the way until I made it to the top of my ladder in the car business. And then one day I'm driving over the Champlain Bridge in a $100,000 car that does not belong to me. I'm thinking I'm going to crash it. I'm going to fall over the bridge. And I stopped the car. Yeah.
What was it that made you feel that way at that point after all of these years of,
It was a
going?
panic attack. I had my
Okay.
first severe panic attack on the Champlain Bridge. And so I pulled to the left of the bridge and I saw not sirens, but like it was in the morning. So I saw maybe the bridge patrol. And they're like, "Ma'am, we don't care what's going on with you. You cannot stay here." And I actually recorded it for my psychologist who worked with me after. I was like, "Okay, you know what? I'm a strong Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move this car. I can't crash these people's car because I got to pay for it out of my paycheck." And so I drove over the bridge and I got to work and I ended up in the clinic. So I went to the hospital and then I contacted my family doctor and Trona, this is a severe panic attack. Now, here's the thing. Some people suffer from minor panic attacks throughout their lives, and panic attacks can arise at a specific time. Like depression, I knew depression very well, but it was just the panic now that was coming, and I had no idea because I had driven over that bridge millions of times. Okay.
Yeah.
So, working with a therapist that was appointed to me by my job, which I very appreciate, she was like, "This is trauma." She goes, "You've never dealt with anything from your childhood." And I was like, "Whoa." So, this is what it feels like. She said I had childhood PTSD, childhood trauma, which made sense because throughout all my adult life, until I was about 30, my greatest obsession was okay, if I don't achieve this by this date, okay, that is a catalyst and I'm going to end my life at 30. So basically, what they were saying was that I buried my suicidal thoughts, and that also was a seed that was planted in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started growing older, that seed became stronger. So my fear and my phobia of bridges, I'm still working on it today. It's my fear of committing suicide because I was going to drive my car over a bridge.
Incredible. Incredible journey.
Yeah, something else, right?
Right. And childhood trauma, you'll feel it as anxiety, but it's not treated the same way as anxiety, or, it's treated differently because it needs to be treated as PTSD.
Yes.
So you finally got the help. How long did it take you to just like realize, accept, and be able to move past all these traumas? And are you really over it today?
No, it took me 5 years. And
Okay.
I'm still, like, my dad called a few times today. And my father, he's very loving, but he's a bit toxic. So, I mean, I had to cut off my sisters. So let's say I speak to three sisters. So I'm still dealing with the aftermath of the way I was raised, because the aftermath of childhood trauma, as I'm sure you're aware, is that you don't think you're worthy of anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's self sabotage. You know, you have something great, you're going to find a way to sabotage it. And that's what I did throughout all my adulthood. A few years ago, how I started to really go deep dig is when I started meditating.
So now you're 30 years old. You take 5 years now to deal with all your demons, right?
I'm 38. Yeah,
You're
I'm
38
38.
now.
Yeah.
And what is it that, it's obviously something that you're going to deal with, probably that you fight with all the time a little bit. The demon always will creep up and you'll have to fight it away. But what is it that created this shift in you where you started turning your demons into success, where you stopped sabotaging yourself and you actually celebrated your wins instead of trying to like hurt yourself?
By practicing being more aware. And I have to say that I practice Ho'oponopono. I'm not sure if you know of the practice. It's a Hawaiian practice of meditation.
Okay.
So Ho'oponopono, the belief is that manifests in your life, be it a negative situation, patterns, it can be broken by meditating on it and thanking it and releasing it. And that has worked wonders in my life for the last few years as well. So when a family situation manifests, and I'm like, okay, this is a pattern. When, for example, when you're a rebellious kid and you go on the workplace, guess what? You're rebellious, educated or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I noticed that pattern with myself. I used to have huge problems with authority figures. So I was the kind of employee, it was best that you didn't give me a schedule. Okay? Because I'm going to show up whenever I want. And if you tell me I have to be there at 9, I don't care. I'm coming at 9:05. Okay? I was just a hot mess. And then I'm like, okay, I had all of these bad habits. Trauma causes bad habits, even paying bills. I hired a life coach one time within the 5 year frame. I got myself a lot of help. And I'm like, I have all of this money, but and it's not that I was being irresponsible because I wanted to, because I was a heavy procrastinator. So I'd pile all the bills on the table and do my ledger, do my Excel sheet, make sure I pay all of this, da da da. But then there was always this build up, this fear. And so I would prefer to do something more pleasurable. So then I would call my friends, hey, let's go out for supper,
Right.
So, and because when you have childhood trauma, you get stuck in patterns. So for example, in the real estate business that I work in, when I hear a tenant saying, okay, I'm going to the Régie de Logement, da da da, the first thing I think to myself, this is a person who grew up in trauma and dysfunction. That's why they can't get a grip on paying their rent on time and doing certain things, being responsible. And I did get the help for it, but within itself, it's awareness. But it's also wanting to heal. It's also wanting to be the best version of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I used to get in fights with women all the time. Okay. And my best friend, who one day I go to her and I'm like, but how come I'm blocking all of these girls and you're still friends with them? What are you doing that I don't know? And she made me aware of my pattern because of my stepmothers. I used to always fight with women. And then I healed that. Now I have tons of female friends, and I enjoy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? I guess awareness is the key, right? Awareness is,
And
and
how do you become aware, right? How do you
exactly.
become aware?
Well, that's 50% of recovery is once you figure it out and you are aware that, you're halfway there. That's the biggest feat.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. My boss the other day, my current boss, she was talking to me and I was like feeling so, and this is raw, okay? I was feeling so angry. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is how I felt with my stepmother. And then I had to release that. I had to, on my lunch break, I came and I meditated and I had to really release the trauma, the energy. Another thing that helps trauma is exercising. There's this YouTube site that helps me a lot. It's called The Crappy Childhood Fairy, actually. And so she talks to you and gives you, maintenance tricks after your healing and after your therapy.
You've reached out in different ways to figure out, your triggers and be aware of them, and you've learned how to treat them. So you're basically controlling everything right now in a way where you're able to function in a positive way. So whenever that trigger comes up, it's there, you're aware of it, number one. And number two, you've figured out how to relieve yourself from that angst that it brings on. Am I correct in saying this?
You are correct, but I have to be full disclosure. I've been on medication for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps a lot as well with the triggers. You don't feel them as intensely and you can think clearer.
Yeah, yeah. So today, with all this that's happened to you in your life, today you are successfully, an influencer online. And for someone who would self-sabotage and, didn't feel worthy, that's a huge, leap, right? Because an influencer online is someone who is confident, someone who is gathering up a lot of people who will follow her and look up to her. And you are called an influencer for a reason, because your word and your actions are being looked at and sometimes even scrutinized, right? There's a price to pay for that as well. So how do you get to that point where you're okay with the critique? Okay, you can handle the critique considering your background, right? And what you felt like years ago, and also be an influencer. How did you get to that point where you are today?
Well, influence marketing for me at the time when I started 5 years ago was just a way to make money. And by making the money, I dealt with a lot of emptiness inside, right? So I've nurtured that part of me, that emptiness, that hole that nothing could fill. Not a boyfriend, not a new purse, not a new car, nothing. So once I healed that, then I was able to communicate with my audience with my authentic self. I lost about 3,000 or 4,000 followers because my platform was no longer conducive to materialism. So even till this day, the reason why people follow me, I think, is because I'm real. I will let people know when I'm trying a new medication and how it bloats me and what remedies I take to, help my double chin or my midsection that bloats from the compilation of medications that I take. And I just became real. And that's why the brands, I get fillers,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very real about that. I let people know what fillers to get. And in terms of criticism, I have to be very honest with you. I got criticism in the very beginning. People couldn't understand that I was a corporate educated woman blogging or doing influence marketing. People would laugh at me and say, all you do is stay behind your computer screen all day. And in my head, I'm like, no, I am making money all day, And so at first it was really, really hard. 4 years ago, I got nominated for the Influencer of the Year, and that changed a lot for me. It helped me realize, okay, not only am I paving the way for other women in industries that were not opened up to men, or industries that were not open up to Afro women, Afro Canadian or Afro West Indian women. A lot of doors were opening up, and it was because I'm probably one of the older generation influencers because we were knocking on doors, right? So when you realize you're making a difference, you don't look and you don't get as much criticism. A lot of influencers, they put a lot more online and maybe they're prone to criticism,
Mm-hmm.
or they want to get a reaction, because reaction creates controversy. Controversy means that you're going to get a lot of followers, people are going to follow you. I'm not into that. Actually, my account has been private since the last few days because I do need a break as well. But with my profound sense of spirituality, I look at everything that manifests and I take responsibility. So if I manifest someone criticizing me for something that I put online or something or an action that I've done, I take a step back and I really think about it profoundly. And I ask the divine to really heal me or to heal that pattern or to heal that energy around that. And it does change, it does help. Have you ever heard of Ho'opono? Ho'opono? It's 4 words. I'm sorry, I love you, please forgive me, and thank you. And that's the meditation I do all day.
That's a great strategy. I've never heard of this specific meditation. And if there's a resource that you can give for people to look into it a little more, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I can recommend the book called Zero Limits by Joe Vitale. Well, he was one of the healers. I think it was called The Secret. Remember The Secret when
Yes.
it came out? Okay. So he was one of the I can't say the characters from the show. He was one of the personalities. So he created a book called Zero Limits: The Secret Hawaiian System for Wealth, Health, Peace, and much more. It's just taking responsibility for the manifestations, the good and the bad. It's called a cleaning. So you're cleaning your trauma, you're cleaning energy, you're cleaning things that may have been passed on to you ancestral as well. I have a dog, right? And I've never met my grandmother in Dominica, but one of my sisters had. So when my sisters came to Canada, she was like, "You act just like our grandma with your dog," because she told me specific things. She's like, "Our grandma does that the exact same thing." I have a watch obsession. Okay, I would mortgage a home for a new watch, right? So it's crazy. I didn't know where I got that from. I got that from my grandmother. So the trauma, the intergenerational trauma, sometimes we're experiencing from previous generations and we're not aware of it.
Have you ever done Reiki?
I have. I
Yeah,
love it.
I've done it too. And there's a program, I don't know what to call it, whatever, a Reiki session where you actually cleanse cellular memory. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So if
Wow.
ever you want to know where to go, I have somebody for that.
Oh, I would love
Yeah.
to. I would like you were saying, it's in the DNA,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So would you say one of your personal habits that make you successful and keep you inspired is the meditation that you do? Or is there something else?
I would say that is what it is, faith, because from going from suicide to wanting to still live and being alive 8 years after, I made a pact with myself. And be very careful because when you plant these seeds in your mind, life will create events, right? So it's the same thing. So what seeds are you planting in your mind? So when I do find myself on an off day or where I'm like, oh, I get down on myself because I don't think that I'm working hard enough or I'm not doing enough. And I say to myself, you know what? Let's go meditate. Let's go recenter. and thank, I thank all the time. You have to thank even the littlest things. You have to thank the universe, the worst situations. And I believe that you have to transmute that energy. Once you transmute that energy and you do it on a consistent basis, your life only gets better.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? I want to commend you on being yourself online, because it could get to your head being an influencer, right? And you start like acting or being someone you're not, which is actually the person that you're hurting the most is yourself, because now you have like a double persona. So it's nice and refreshing to know that you're out there just being yourself and saying, I don't care. This is me. Love me or hate me. Take me as I am. So I want to commend you on that.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. And just to touch on that, that's a lot of years of learning to love myself.
Right. Especially where you came from, right? In a position where you didn't love yourself, right? You converted that into something else, which is positive
Right?
for you and that works for you.
It sure does. It sure
Yeah.
does.
So, Petrona, I know my listeners will love to know even more about you and your strategies on how you made it through adversity to success. So, let's take a quick peek and fast track through some questions. Are you ready?
Okay, sure.
So, what is your definition of success?
My definition of success is being happy with whatever you're doing at the moment.
What is the one thing you are most excited about today?
Oh, getting to speak with you and taking my nap right before. I had a great nap.
So you're wide awake and ready to go. That's amazing. Thank you. So now for my soul shaker question. If you woke up tomorrow and you were stripped bare of everything in your business and in your career and only had shelter, food, and your family, no computer, no iPhone. Okay.
Mhm.
What would be the first things you would do in the next 30 days with only $500 in the bank?
Knowing me, if I didn't have a business, I would probably look into creating a business or creating something. So okay, I have no phone, right? I have no internet. Oh my goodness.
Mm-mm. You have nothing that makes your business successful right now. None of that.
Hmm. That's a really tough
But you do
one.
have $500.
Even with $500, I mean, okay. I would buy a car for $200, repair it for 100, put it back on the market for 1,000 and double my money.
I'd like to see what that $200 car looks like.
Or you could work wonders.
Oh, goodness. Okay. That's good. So, Petrona, on a last and final note, what's the one takeaway message my listeners need to hear today?
Well, I would like your listeners to really acknowledge if they feel any symptoms of anxiety. So symptoms of anxiety could be when you're driving and your chest pitter patters or your palms become sweaty. Don't ignore that signal. Those are signs from anxiety and they do get worse. So acknowledge, be compassionate with yourself, and please seek professional help.
And not to be embarrassed or ashamed of that. A lot of people feel like it's a shameful thing. And you know what? It's actually the best gift you could give to yourself, to recognize that you're hurting for whatever reason and to go get that help. Correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's the best thing I've ever done. Being on medication helped me a lot. I wished I would have done it when I was a lot younger.
Thank you for everything, Petrona, and for being here today and sharing with us your strip burst story. I hope that there's listeners out there that, will ignite their life with the words that, you shared today with us. Thanks again for being here. And I only wish you prosperity and lots of health.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for letting me share my story.
That's all for this episode of Stripped Bare FM. Start living your best life. Head to CatherineContos.com for more information and resources, as well as ways to connect with Catherine directly. That's available exclusively on Catherine with a C, KONTOS.com.